Hi, today we're looking at thesis statements and how to write them. Now, the thesis statement is something that you're going to want to use in virtually every single essay. Narrative essays aside, not including essays like that. But generally, if your teacher calls it an essay, you're going to want to use a thesis statement. I don't know. I'm not quite able to capture everything on the screen, but if you go over the lecture itself, you'll be able to read everything in there that you need. The T that's cut off here, for instance. So Socrates says that any discourse, and when he's talking about a discourse, he's essentially talking about argument. Any discourse ought to be constructed like a living creature, with its own body, as it were. It must not lack either head or feet. It must have a middle and extremities so composed as to suit each other and the whole work. So what he's talking about here is a metaphor, right? He's saying arguments are like a living creature. Right? He's giving us a metaphor here. And this gives us something to dissect, right? What is he really talking about, right? He's talking about extremities, head and feet, must have all these things suited as to suit each other and the whole work, right? In this case, we have a deer. Metaphorically, we don't want to end up with the head of a polar bear. When I think of this metaphor, I like to think of the head and the body as the argument of the essay, because it's like the mind, heart, and the soul of the essay. And the legs, you want to visualize those as your body paragraphs. Those are your supporting paragraphs. Without those, the head does not stand, the body does not move. So always keep that in mind. Got to have supporting arguments and claims to support the main part of the argument. Otherwise, the head does not stand, the body does not move. You can review that sample thesis there. Skip ahead here. One of the things that you'll see if you look at that sample, for instance, is that you'll see that in a very specific thesis, there are really two types of thesis statements that you can write. I should say at least two. There are more than two. One is simple and straightforward, and the other is maybe more verbose. The example on this page is the example of the latter, the more verbose type, where you're not only stating your main claim, right? That would usually go in a thesis statement, but you're suggesting or kind of indicating what your supporting points are going to be. So those two types of thesis statements that you would generally see would be one that just simply has a claim, two, the other one has a claim and several supporting points. When you create a thesis, make sure that you create one that is complex, negotiable, and specific, CNS. The other one, well, we didn't mention it yet. The third type of thesis statement that we could discuss is the evolving thesis, which it talks about here. There's an example of it linked up to our Canvas page. David Friedman's How Junk Food Can End Obesity is a good example of that. Basically, in an evolving thesis, you put forth kind of a hypothesis, but more of like a very general or not so certain thesis statement or claim at the beginning. And then as each body paragraph goes by, you add to and narrow down your claim. So by the time you get to the end, you have then evolved your thesis statement has evolved and become something quite interesting by the end. All right. So then it gives us an example here. When you're looking at a thesis statement and constructing a good solid one, at the very minimum you want to have a claim, and at most you want to have a claim plus the supporting points, which is what you see in the second point there. Then we have some sample thesis statements. This is from Why Don't Convenience Stores Sell Better Food? One solution is to lower more large grocery stores to these so-called food deserts. But it's often much easier, some advocates argue, to simply get the ubiquitous corner stores to start selling healthier food. Then she goes on to talk about her solution to the food droughts. Much current analysis of labor market conditions paints a cautiously optimistic, even unabashedly positive picture of job trends, but easily accessible data demonstrate that we are, in reality, living through an extended period of extraordinary Great Depression scale underutilization of man-male power, and this severe, quote, work deficit for men has gradually worsened over time. This from Men Without Work. This one is from Food as Thought. Pollan contends that this one I should mention before we start is interesting because this is what you would typically see, kind of a structure for bouncing an idea off of someone else's idea. So, for example, very useful for you, like writing essay 2, that's exactly what you're doing, right? You're speaking to Singer, you're speaking to Hardin, bouncing ideas off of either one or both of them, and this could be a good model for how to construct your thesis statement for essay 2. Pollan contends that our definition of healthy eating is driven by a well-funded corporate machine. According to Pollan, the food industry, along with nutrition science and journalism, is capitalizing on our confusion over how to eat. While Pollan implicates his own profession in this critique, he simultaneously contributes to our cultural anxiety over food. And this is from a student essay called Does Texting Affect Writing? So this is not exactly a scientific study. This author claims some people believe that using these abbreviations is hindering the writing abilities of students, and others argue that texting is actually having a positive effect on writing. In fact, it seems likely that texting has no significant effect on student writing. And then what we would do at this point in class is work on your thesis statement, constructing, reconstructing, writing, rewriting, writing from scratch your thesis statement for essay 2. So that's what we would normally do at this point in time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.